memory of man is full of scenes of summer landscapes when he was a boy. The favorite walk, the river where he swam, wild flowers, butterflies, the silent joy of looking down on England's patchwork fields, or catching sight of breakers in some distant bay. The water that gives life, the air we breathe, the quiet valley and the common blue, the very earth, all these are threatened now by thoughtlessness or greed, or me or you. Do we preserve these things? The choice is ours, these elements of life, to keep or throw away. The living waters, the breath of life. What do we do to the air we breathe? We pollute our atmosphere by carelessness and by primitive methods of handling. But mostly we destroy the natural air by inefficiency, with the unburnt gases from the combustion engine, from industry, and from our homes. This atmospheric sewage is a threat to all living things. Smoke and grit attack the lungs and cause bronchitis, the English disease, that costs the country 30 million working days a year and 30 million days of personal misery. This also represents the wasting of valuable source materials. Now, if we could recover them, we could turn waste into wealth. Smoke and waste sulfur attacks metal, fabric, and stone, corroding the very things we produce. At the moment, it's costing money to waste money. The old-fashioned coal fire is by far the biggest threat to health, so we should welcome natural gas and sulfur-free fuel oils. When used in modern furnaces, they provide very efficient domestic heating. This kind of district heating, along with nuclear power electricity, provides warmth and comfort without spoiling the clean air. Tall chimneys can disperse the harmful gases into the upper atmosphere, but they're very expensive. And the designing and siting of tall chimneys is both an art and a science.
Normally, for an isolated chimney, we have an established formula for calculating the pollution that will reach ground level. But the problem arises when we have a chimney within city surroundings, and here the buildings will have an effect on the airflow, which in turn will affect the way that the pollution is brought to ground level.
Here, of course, we've got the question of priorities. In the past, it's always been the practice to give the aesthetic qualities the premier consideration over those of air pollution. Fashion has always been to hide the chimney within the outline of the building or the building complex. Surely the challenge here is to design a building with a chimney that is not only aesthetically pleasing, but efficient from an air pollution point of view.
It should also be remembered that the building's upwind of the chimney can affect the dispersion of pollution by creating turbulence, which will bring the gases to ground level quickly.
So one man's smoke can be another man's air for breathing. One industry may be scattering the source materials of another. For example, that rare metal germanium for our transistors is recovered from flue gas. Such cooperation between industries would reduce pollution and improve their efficiency. The motor car, a symbol of progress and of pollution. For again, it's inefficient combustion, dispersing deadly gases at street level. Now we can work towards more efficient engines, and by using chemicals in the exhaust system, we can convert the waste gases back into the natural elements of the air. All this will increase the cost of motoring. But is there a choice? Already, legislation in America has decided that life is intolerable with car pollution. Our export cars now have to meet their rigid standards. But do we have to wait until our own towns are as bad as Los Angeles and Tokyo before we revalue the air we breathe?
Fine, Mike.
Okay, good.
Ready for the detail?
Ready?
Okay, fine.
I'm dropping down to ice.
Okay, could you straight down to 0 and shut off? Fine, thanks very much.
That's a reasonable test, Mike, wasn't
That's not bad at all. The 15 cruise is a bit high, but I think the rest of it will get us through, you know?
Yes, I think that's better than we've been seeing of late.
That's right.
Good. Well, I think if we take the E-type off and put an X-Ray 6 on instead.
You get that, Bob?
So we can modify the cars, or we could possibly modify the fuel. But if the oil companies were to offer pollution-free petrol at 4p a gallon more, would we queue for it? What do we do to our waters? Well, our rivers have provided an all-too-convenient drain pipe for the community and industry. Bacteria feeding on the effluent uses up oxygen. In moderation, the natural biology of the river can purify it. But if the river is overloaded, then all the oxygen is absorbed, and death comes to the living waters. Again, is there a choice? Well, oxygen can be put back into the sewage in our modern domestic treatment plants. Biological growth is cultured on gravel, so the water running through it is purified by nature's own method. Now, these traditional treatment plants are very effective, but they're also expensive, and they take up increasing areas of valuable land. So the introduction of new techniques and materials must be a priority. This new lightweight plastic material is an alternative for gravel filter beds. It takes up 1/5 of the area and is 10 times more effective. The effluent from industry is more complex than organic domestic sewage. It contains many toxic chemicals and metals. The cost of treatment is enormously expensive, but possible.
The effluent from the factory contains quite a lot of acid. We neutralize the acid with lime slurry, which in turn separates the particles of metal from the water. It is pumped up to the settling tanks. The treated water comes over the weir into the flume and pumped through the sand filter beds and then into the river. The sludge is pumped up from the settling tanks to the filter vacuum drum.
which separates the water from the sludge. The sludge is then dried and blew onto a scraper. This sludge contains quite a few metals: copper, nickel, zinc, iron and chrome, and some 9% oil.
So this plant alone has saved the river from 200 tons of sludge a week. But we still have the problem of disposing of this waste with its metal content, remembering that the waste of one industry could be wealth to another industry. Another choice is to take the effluent in pipelines directly out to sea beyond the beaches. The sea, by its sheer volume, can cope with effluent better than the rivers and estuaries. But there is a limit beyond which the oceans themselves will become cesspools. The question of how the effluent disperses from sea outflows has become the subject of intensive research. Pipelines are costly, so it's very important to know the minimum length that will protect our beaches and harbors. But the many moods of wind, weather, and tides around our coast make this very difficult to calculate. So, once again, we have the tools of science working for us against pollution. The latest technique is to label the effluent with a radioactive tracer and a green fluorescein dye. The dye is just a visible marker for the skipper of the survey vessel. The radioactive tracer is the target for the gamma scintillation Geiger counters.
Entering activity now. Coming up on 1, 2, 3, 4.
The radioactivity gets diluted very quickly, so our instruments have to be very sensitive. We track through the patch in a zigzag fashion, continually fixing our position. At the same time, our instruments record the levels of radioactivity, and like this, we can monitor the dispersion of the sewage. All the information is processed in the computer, which enables us to draw up a series of contour diagrams. We're hoping to establish guidelines to help engineers design outfalls that are efficient, but at the same time, economical.
So, many disciplines can be brought to bear on pollution. With science, with technology, and by caring, we can protect our living waters. We can tip waste products onto good land, and that's criminal. We can tip them onto reclaimable land, fine. But we can't go on doing that forever. Like the sea, there's a limit in sight. We must have alternatives. And here is where modern technology is applied to a principle known to man through the ages. The Greeks said, fire purifies, and it does without doubt, in the modern incinerator plant.
The latest continuous incinerators these days are capable of burning all kinds of refuse, industrial, domestic, including plastics and waste oil. They require no auxiliary fuel, and they deliver at the end of the process a completely sterile ash. The gases over the firebed are at 2000 degrees Fahrenheit and contain small particles of ash and dust. These have to be cooled considerably before they are passed to the cleaning equipment, and we've been experimenting with partially treated sewage sludge as a cooling medium, and it's worked. We've now developed this technique to a stage where we can spray sewage sludge directly into the incinerator. We feel this is a major breakthrough because we can now destroy simultaneously all the waste products from the community.
That's a thought, isn't it? a plant which could totally dispose of the entire waste products of a city. Such a plant could well eliminate the pollution of our air, our water, and our land. Controlling pollution is only part of the challenge. The soil and life is the basic source of our food. With our expanding population, it becomes vital that we employ the most effective methods of farming. But with scientific progress, we are bound to get side effects. So when these disturb the natural ecology, it should concern us just as much as pollution does. All the species in nature depend on each other for their survival. And we humans depend on nature for our survival.
We start our observations in the soil because this is where the side effects can first be easily noticed. Now, although we make our pesticides selective, we still kill other creatures. We can kill them directly, or we can kill them indirectly by removing their source of food. And it's also possible for the chemical to be carried by some of these animals without being affected by themselves, but which hand it on to the next link in the food chain. So that you may end up by, for instance, predatory birds being very hard hit. One of the ways that we tackle this job is by studying the movements of predatory beetles. We can catch them, mark them so that we can recognize the individuals again, and release them, and then catch them once more. And depending on which trap we find them in, it tells us a lot about their movements, their populations, and in fact their general ecology. This is a long-term business. We do realize that we can't get our...
Just as all nature is interdependent, so are we. We must cooperate with nature and with each other.
That was found. Until found in the year was 52 Fahrenheit. The sun was 48 Fahrenheit and the sky was low and hanging clouds. The sea was disturbed. Group 2 in the wave count. 8 waves to 1 minute, 24 waves to 3 minutes. The brush was 10 to a second.
On the first 2 seconds of the sheet long antennae,
Yes,
with quills on the end.
This was
Very, very beautiful, that, isn't it? What colour is it?
We are most concerned with the changes which are bound to happen when development, reclamation and industry alter the balance of nature at the mouth of the River Tees. The nuclear power station is a wonderful project, and industry will bring prosperity and progress to the people here. But what of the fate of millions of living creatures which depend for their existence on this coastal area of sea, inland water and marsh? We are concerned with all life everywhere, but we care particularly for our own special locality, its beauty and its wildlife. was a life there. You cannot see the fish. You think there is no life there, but you are wrong, there is. As we were standing in the sea, our feet sank in the sand. The water wasn't very cold, with shells on every hand. The sea is not too rough there, the sand dunes not too high. The fish, they're swimming merrily, but the sea will never die. We hope that no one becomes apathetic to the problem. What is the good of shouting about preservation of tigers in the jungles of foreign lands if we are indifferent to the destruction or driving away of our own special creatures? We refuse to become apathetic. We are concerned. That is the reason for all our efforts, now and in the future.
We have the knowledge and the skills we need, but we must work together, we and they, to save our land and life. The choice is ours, those elements of life to keep, not throw away.